Stop the genocidal persecution, mass incarceration, police brutality, and murder of Black and brown people. Stop the patriarchal degradation, dehumanization, and subjugation of all women everywhere, and all oppression based on gender or sexual orientation. Stop wars of empire, armies of occupation, and crimes against humanity. Stop the demonization, criminalization, and deportations of immigrants and the militarization of the border. Stop capitalism and imperialism from destroying our planet.
You are watching the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show. This is August 6, 2020, episode 20. My name is Sansara Taylor. I'm a co-host of the show. And here in studio with me, Andy Z. How are you doing?
All right. How are you, Sansara? Episode 20.
Andy is our main host. I'm going to just turn it over to you to tell people a little bit about this show as a whole.
Right. Well, I did just want to say, in fact, I just can't resist saying that it's August 6th, which is Hiroshima Day. It's the day that the United States dropped the first of two atom bombs on a Hiroshima city in Japan at the end of World War II. And then 3 days later, they dropped a bomb on Nagasaki. These two bombs together killed instantly almost 250,000 people, the great majority of whom were civilians. It was a form of mass terrorism to frighten both the people there, into that government there, into submission, but more importantly, to send a message to the world and their rivals that the United States was prepared to commit an unbelievable and unspeakable crime against humanity to become the dominant country in the world. So that's something we shouldn't forget as we begin this episode, the 20th episode of the Revolution Nothing Less show, which is about replacing a system that would do such a thing with a radically different system, which is concentrated in a constitution for a new socialist republic, authored by Bob Avakian, whose work and whose leadership informs this show and that we encourage people to get into. And in fact, we are followers of Bob Avakian, and you should be too, because that is the method approach we need to bring about a radically different world. But I did want to say, just in opening the show before you get to telling people what's going on with the show, I wanted to say two things. One, we're going to begin the show with an important announcement of a major statement that Bob Avakian has made. And before I get to that, I do want to say that there is a way for you who are the first-time viewer, or you have been watching the show for a while, to become a part of the movement for an actual revolution. And that is to take up what we call the 5-2-6. You heard at the beginning of the show, one of our regular hosts of the show, Luan, read the 5 stops. And their 5 stops are part of the 5-2-6. The 5 stops are what she read. These are 5 horrific crimes that this system commits regularly against the people of this country and the world that cannot be reformed. And we've often challenged people in the show, you tell us how under this system you could get rid of, for example, the patriarchal degradation, dehumanization, subjugation of all women everywhere, and all oppression based on sexual and gender orientation. We're going to have a segment again this show on that. But you tell us how that could be reformed under this system, and I will promise you it cannot be. And this provides the basis for this revolution, the fact that there are these 5 things which millions of people are concerned about, one or all of them. This is part of the basis for an actual revolution, because people have this care and because the system can't solve it. There is a way to solve it, which brings us to the 2 choices that were posed by Bob Avakian as part of the 5-2-6. We have 2 choices, he says. Either live with all of this and condemn future generations to the same or worse if they have a future at all, or make revolution, which is what our show is about. And then there's the 6, which are 6 points of attention, which are ways that we try to live today, which speak to those 5 stops and a bit more about not ourselves being in any way part of those 5 horrific forms of oppression, but indeed living by principles and working to the time when we can actually overcome those things while fighting against their effects today. So these are 6 principles that the revolution clubs live by, they spread them everywhere, and they concentrate the future we're fighting for. So these 5 to 6, we say, are easy. It's easy to remember, and it concentrates the path to getting organized for a revolution. And this is something that you can take up. You can find this on revcom.us. You can get a printed copy of this. You can organize a group of supporters of the revolution around the 526. It actually is the basis under which you could form a club, a revolution club around the 526. And in that revolution club, related to the point of attention number 1, the first task of that club is to promote and be fighting for the new, a world free of exploitation and oppression, for the new communism that's been developed by Bob Avakian. It's a principle of being for revolution and for the goal of emancipating all of humanity, which is based on the work of Bob Avakian. So I don't want to say much more today because I really do want to get to this statement, but I want to tell you that this is, and just really encourage you to get into the 526, and in that you will see and understand what we do in every segment of this show. So I was hoping, Sansara, though, before I get to this new and important statement from Bob Avakian, if you would tell people about the full panoply of our show today, the 20th
episode today.
Episode 20.
Today, yeah. As Andy said, the 526 is the glue of the revolution, of the movement for revolution that we are fighting to contribute to with this show, and it's also the glue and the through line of this, of what we do, what we cover, and it's going to be a pivot for some of this episode as well. We're basically dealing with 2 big themes this episode, 2 big questions of the revolution. One is concentrated, as you were speaking to, in the question of the oppression and the liberation of women. We began to open this up last week. We're going to continue to stay on this. So we have a segment. It's a really good segment on this in the middle of the show, drawing a lot from a very powerful speech that Bob Avakian gave. We're taking an excerpt. I'll tell you about that when we get to it. And the other big question that we're dealing with, actually in a few different dimensions, is the battle for the future that's very sharply joined right now, with fascism rising and the world's only superpower. So we're going to start that off, as Andy has now indicated a couple times, with a very important new statement from BA. Andy's going to speak a little bit about that at the top of the show. Then we're going to come at this question of the battle for the future and fascism in a couple other ways. Later in the show, we'll have an interview from some of the RevComs on the ground up in Portland, where things have been very intense there. I spoke to Maya on Zoom. I'm very happy, Maya with the Revolution Club. We'll share some of that and some footage of what they've been up to. And we're going to talk at the end about plans from refusefascism.org to mobilize people in protest and resistance against this fascist regime. So 2 big themes, one on the battle that's joined right now against fascism, and another which is really a deep fault line of this revolution all the way through now and all the way through around the oppression and the liberation of women. So
let's go.
Yeah.
This week, Revcom.us, the website of the Revcoms, the Revolutionary Communists, published a major statement from Bob Avakian, B.A. We're opening today's program with a brief introduction to this statement. And the title of this statement reveals its import for understanding the urgent situation we face and what it is that must be done. Quote, on the immediate critical situation, the urgent need to drive out the fascist Trump-Pence regime, voting in this election, and the fundamental need for revolution. Take in the full scope of that title. And to set the stage and introduce you to this, we're going to share part 1 of Bob Avakian's statement. Quote, the situation today holds truly unprecedented and momentous challenges, with profound implications not only for the people in this country, but for all of humanity, end quote. Then the statement quotes from a talk Bob Avakian gave in 2017, which we're going to play for you right now.
We are confronted by, we are now being ruled by a fascist regime, relentlessly assaulting civil rights and liberties and openly promoting bigotry and inequality, acting with callous disregard or cold-blooded malice toward those they consider inferior and a drain or stain on the country, on a mission to deny health care to millions who will suffer and many who will die without it, crudely degrading women as objects of plunder, breeders of children without the right to abortion or birth control, subordinate to husbands and men in general, defying the science of climate change, attacking the science of evolution, and repudiating the scientific method overall. A regime brandishing an arsenal of mass destruction and threatening nuclear war, intensifying state terror against Muslims, immigrants, and people in the inner cities, unleashing and giving encouragement and support to brutal thugs spewing vile America first, white supremacists, male supremacists, and anti-LGBT venom. A regime that boasts of all this and declares its intention to do even worse.
Bob Avakian's statement goes on to say, and I am now reading from the statement, quote, "This is a regime headed by a demented bully with his finger on the nuclear button. It is a regime that, without exaggeration, threatens not just greatly heightened suffering for the masses of humanity, but the very existence of humanity itself. Through its intensified moves to further the plunder of the environment and its boasts of unequal weapons of mass destruction and its blatant declaration of the willingness to use those weapons, including its massive nuclear arsenal. And this is Bob Avakian writing, I have also emphasized that it is this system of capitalism imperialism which, through its normal workings, has brought forth this fascism, and that no fundamental change for the better can be brought about under this system. And instead, this system must be overthrown and replaced by a radically different and far better system in order to abolish and uproot all relations of exploitation and oppression and violent conflicts that they give rise to, all of which is built into the foundations of this system and its ongoing functioning and requirements. Right now, for everyone who is concerned with ending injustice and oppression, and with the question of whether humanity will have a future worth living, if it has a future at all, removing the Trump-Pence fascist regime from power is an immediate, urgent question and a truly historic imperative. And for those who understand the need for revolution, for the overthrow of this system as the fundamental solution to the continuing horrors this system causes for the masses of humanity, whether this system is ruled through an open fascist dictatorship or the disguised democratic dictatorship of the ruling capitalist class, the immediate struggle to oust the Trump-Pence regime from power must be approached not as a diversion from or substitute for building the movement for the revolution that is needed, but precisely as a part, a crucial part, an urgent requirement of the overall work of building for this revolution. Our fundamental goal and guiding star remains revolution, nothing less. In everything we do, including all the struggles we take part in that are themselves short of revolution, our consistent approach is and must be to make all this serve that fundamental goal of revolution and the emancipation of all humanity. Normally, we revolutionary communists argue that people should not vote in bourgeois elections, which serve to reinforce the existing system of capitalism imperialism and feed popular illusions that exploitation, oppression, and injustices can somehow be reformed away, short of getting rid of the system that gives rise to these horrors in the first place. But is this the right position to take in relation to this particular election? To answer this, we need to look at the whole picture, end quote. So what I just read is the introduction to a deep and provocative statement whose title, once again, is this: On the immediate critical situation, the urgent need to drive out the fascist Trump-Pence regime, voting in this election, and the fundamental need for revolution. And in this full statement, Bob Avakian concisely summarizes and synthesizes the stark reality we face over the next 6 months from now through January. It captures the complexity of what we must rise to do. And when I say what we must do, I am not just speaking here of what the revolutionaries must do, although Bob Avakian definitely addresses that, as you heard. But much more, this is an urgent and inspiring challenge to all who care about the future of humanity, of what we all must do. So, go to www.revcom.us and read and download this statement. Get it to people you know. Get it to people you don't know. Post it to your social media. Discuss it. And write to us at therevcoms@gmail.com. And on revcom.us, there is a forum. You can go and put your comment in there. And I'll have more to say about this at the end of the show.
Last week, we began carving into the question of the oppression and the liberation of women. And we're going to go deeper on that today, and we're going to continue to do so in coming weeks, because this is a central question of the revolution. Fighting to break all the chains that bind women and differently gendered people, this is a central part of the new communism that Bob Avakian has advanced. And waging this fight today is a driving force in the strategy to make revolution, to actually get to the point where we can overthrow this system and bring it down. And continuing this fight against patriarchy in all of its forms is going to be a driving force all the way through in the new society till we reach the emancipation of humanity. We'll get more deeply into that as well in future segments. For very good reason, ending this oppression is one of the 5 stops. We say stop the patriarchal degradation, dehumanization, and subjugation of all women everywhere, and all oppression based on gender and sexual orientation. It is also one of the 6 points of attention, where we say, and we mean, we fight for a world where all the chains are broken. Women, men, and differently gendered people are equals and comrades. We do not tolerate physically or verbally abusing women or treating them as sexual objects, nor do we tolerate insults or so-called jokes about a person's gender or sexual orientation. The oppression of women is so normalized in this society and culture, and it has been for thousands of years in different forms, that it's rendered almost invisible. People participate in it, and they put up with it like the air we breathe, and they don't even notice it much of the time. In the segment that we're going to share with you today from Bob Avakian, he is going to make us see and feel the outrage of things that we put up with and we live through every day that surround women and that degrade all humanity in this putrid culture. This is a significant and very moving section of a speech that he gave in 2012 called BA Speaks, Revolution, Nothing Less. And this excerpt is called Rebelling Against Guy Culture, Fighting to End All Oppression. So we'll go right to it.
Think about what's going on in the popular culture, particularly in hip-hop. The promotion of pimping. The brutal treatment of women, tricked and forced into this and maintained it through the most disgusting violence. Even turning it into adjectives, pimpalicious and all the rest. Think about it, the effect this has on the youth coming up and on the culture and the people broadly. Because a big part of all this is what we could call guy culture. It's a culture of degrading domination of women and of wanton violence, a kind of pornography of violence with an American chauvinist and male chauvinist thrust to it. Think about some of these video games where the point is you go out and you kill America's enemies. That's the point of the video game as identified by the army and the ruling class as a whole. Or the video games where a lot of youth are trained and conditioned to think while they're playing the game. They think they're just going like using their thumbs and fingers. They're using their brains, though. Their brains are being influenced. You have video games not only go out and kill America's enemies, you have video games where the high point is you get to hunt down and kill a woman who's portrayed as a whore. How does this condition young people, boys in particular, to think about women and the relations between genders? Think about one of the main institutions and sites of male bonding in this society. Along with pornography, the strip club. That's where you go to hang out with and bond with other young guys or other older guys. Participating in and being titillated by the degradation of women forced to do this. What kind of thinking and conditioning is going on here in terms of how people who are being socialized in this way are being influenced to think about women and whether they're human beings and about the relations and what sex should be about? Look, let's face it. Sex, if it's done right, among people who really care about each other and on the basis of equality and what they want, let's face it, it's one of the greatest pleasures human beings can have, okay? But not when it's done by one part degrading the other part. And this is what people are being socialized to think of as the norm and as the object, the goal. And then we have the phrase, man up. Think about this. What is the logic of this phrase? What is the meaning of man up? It means you stand up and be strong and don't be a coward and don't back down from your responsibilities or from danger. And these are presented as attributes, qualities of men. Now, by logic, who does not have these qualities? Who are these qualities not of? Obviously, women. Think if you went out there and said, look, quit being so weak, woman up. It wouldn't make any sense in the dominant culture. It could make a lot of sense in reality, but it wouldn't make any sense in the dominant culture. Once again, people are being conditioned that to stand up for principle, to stand up for right, to not be afraid or shrink in the face of danger or sacrifice or taking responsibility are qualities of men that men should exercise. And it becomes so perverse that not only do you hear women being influenced to use this phrase, but you see it being promoted in the culture that if a woman wants to have these qualities, then somehow she has to try to man up. I think of the movie G.I. Jane with Demi Moore. This is a movie portraying the great advance for the cause of liberation of women as a woman who can make it in the tough confines and environs of the U.S. military. Become part of the machinery of oppressing and slaughtering human beings all over the world. And the storyline of this movie is Demi Moore plays this woman who has to fight through every attempt of her drill instructor in the basic training and the rest to drive her out of the military. And one after another, she passes these tests and she finds it hard and she needs to get support and advice, but she perseveres. And finally, it comes down to the crowning scene, so to speak, where once again the drill instructor is being extra hard on her, partly, it seems, to drive her out, but maybe to make her actually rise up to the challenge. And in this scene, he's just driving her and driving her and driving her, test after test. And he keeps saying to her, you want to quit? You want to quit? You want to quit? And finally she turns and says, no, fuck you, suck my dick. Which, of course, she does not have. But what is the point? The point is that in order to be really tough and worthy, you have to man up even if you're a woman. Or what about the phrase that's out there so much too? Being made into somebody's bitch. That's the lowliest thing you could be. A woman and in particular a woman who's portrayed as being somewhat hysterical and frenzied, like a dog in heat. Being made into somebody's bitch, that's the lowest thing. And you see it even translated into all kinds of ways. For example, you go out on the basketball court. Somebody takes a shot. It doesn't go right in. It bounces on the rim. It's rolling around. And they'll say, "Get in there, bitch." Now think about it. Why are they saying, "Get in there, bitch"? Because the basketball is acting like a recalcitrant woman. It's not doing what it's supposed to do according to the dictates of this man. It's supposed to get in the basket. And it's rolling around instead, and it might fall out. Get in there, bitch. How is that conditioning people to think even without their being fully conscious of it? Imagine if some white guy went out on the court, started playing basketball, took a shot and was rolling around the rim. He said, "Get in there, nigger." Well, this is the same thing. And once again, you can get away with this in this culture now. It's acceptable. It's conditioning people. And along with this, the women under this system are conditioned, even girls from an early age, to internalize and to go along with so much of this, or to accept that this is the way things are and that nothing better can be expected from men. So try to own it, market yourself, and get the most you can out of this while remaining in what is in fact an oppressed and degraded position. Now all this is not hardwired in people. It's not hardwired in guys any more than in the young women. It's ways that guys are conditioned by the dominant institutions and media and culture to think and act, reflecting the basic oppressive relations of this system and serving the interests of its ruling class. So developing a radical revolt against this revolting culture in many different forms and on many different levels is a very important part of and can make a very important contribution to fighting the power and transforming the people for revolution. Even if much of this culture that becomes part of this radical revolt is not all the way revolutionary and doesn't completely express the communist point of view, it can still make a big contribution by raising disgust at the putrid culture that dominates, by inspiring and provoking people to think differently and think critically, to question what they would otherwise accept, to ponder why the world is the way it is, to dream about and argue about the possibility of a radically different world, to come alive with righteous outrage and the joy of calling out and rebelling against what should not be tolerated. And this contribution will be all the greater if people who do have a communist understanding bring forward a vibrant culture that expresses that and inspires people toward that, while relating in a good way to the many and diverse expressions of a culture of radical revolt against this truly revolting culture.
As one part of the beautiful uprising that has taken place across this country since the police brutally murdered George Floyd in Minneapolis, Portland, Oregon has seen outpourings every single night since then. And they've increased and intensified in the face of Trump's fascist paramilitary forces that he sent in. They were kidnapping people, snatching them off the street in unmarked vehicles, unidentified paramilitary camouflage dressed men. It's a very, very dangerous situation there. And yet in the face of this, people came back even stronger. We covered this last week on the Revolution Nothing Less show, both the protests and the significance of this in a commentary from Andy Z. And this week, I'm very excited and happy to bring on to the Revolution Nothing Less show Maya Malika, who is part of the National Get Organized for an Actual Revolution tour and the Revolution Clubs, who has been up in Portland for about a week now. Maya, welcome to the RNL show.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
How you feeling?
Feeling awesome.
That's good. So listen, people, viewers, if you've seen this show before, you may remember that Maya was with me when we went to Minneapolis in the early days of the upsurge there. And maybe we'll touch on some of that in a minute too. But why don't you just start us off with what it feels like on the ground? Who's out there? What's going on? Why do people keep coming back even in the face of this tear gas and the kidnappings and all of this? What's going on? What's it feel like on the ground?
Well, it feels pretty amazing being on the ground. And I think it's a shared feeling for most people, where people feel like this is the place to be. You have people traveling for hours from Texas, from Los Angeles, from the Bay, from Kentucky. Young people feeling the need that they cannot stay at home and watch this while people are being tear gassed, while Black people continue to be brutalized. And you also have, walls of moms, which are, a lot of them are from the suburbs, and who have put themselves in the front lines, have been tear gassed constantly and continue to come out. And these are people who, again, similar experience about, they do not want to sit at home and watch this go on and feel compelled to do something, feel compelled that, they cannot just sit home and want to take history into their own hands.
You were in Minneapolis with me, and I am curious because that was very early in the upsurge. I mean, it was going across the country. It was clearly a major upsurge, but this is now 2 months in, and the federal forces have been called. Tear gas has been fired. Donald Trump is threatening people almost every day, and with heightened charges and jail time and all of this. So I'm just curious, how would you compare the mood, the understanding, and even some of the questions that are emerging on the ground in Portland as compared to back in Minneapolis a couple months ago?
Right. Well, Minneapolis, yes, we were there, and it was beautiful, right? This beautiful uprising. People poured to the streets and it inspired all across the country. And it was similar to here in Portland, where there were a lot of Black youth, a lot of white people actually taking to the streets. The difference that I see in Portland is more of a fierce determination, that they do not care to be gassed. They don't want to be gassed, but they do not care. They want the feds out. And the other thing is, I feel like there's a understanding that this is fascism, even if that's limited. But they do call it the feds fascist. They do call Trump fascist, and they do see the need for people to stay in the streets. And they have said, even if the feds leave, that they still going to come out, which is a righteous stand, and that's because that's what's needed.
I am curious also, what on the ground, what have you felt that you have learned the most by being there?
Well, I've learned a lot, but one thing I've appreciated is how different types of people of different ages, like I said, the walls of moms have been a really inspiration to me. People of different ages who really are eager to be in the front lines and are not afraid of being gassed, and how people have turned their ways of thinking in very short periods of time. Like I said, some people, this has been their first time protesting, and what propelled them was the fact that the feds, came to town and how they terrorized the people. And this has provided an opening for people to actually dig into where does this come from? Where does this oppression come from? And open to engaging into something that they never thought of or were afraid of, revolution and communism. People are being honest, and we're having honest discussions. And this is something that many people are not used to. And so you also see how, even just the name Walls of Moms, how masses of people coming together is what's actually going to need to, not have sections of, in this case, Black people being encircled by this repressive system. How that needs to grow, and the potential of that in transforming people to becoming revolutionaries in order to actually go all and defeat and dismantle the system. How people can change right away, and it doesn't matter, age and background. It's a heartfelt feeling that people feel when they see this repression coming down on Black people, and their minds get wide open. And this is what it takes, and this is what we're organizing now, right? Where revolution is not on the map, but that needs to change. And the way that change is actually when people start taking up this theory and this science. You grow the numbers and you impact more on a societal level. And this is a small example of what's happening in Portland, where people have changed quickly, into digging into something that felt uncomfortable, just a week ago. And I'm not saying they're in it all the way, but some are. And this needs to be on a wider scale.
Well, Maya, I really want to thank you for taking the time. I know you got to get yourself off to a film showing. You're showing one of Bob Avakian's speeches with some people that you've met there, so I don't want to hold you up.
Okay, thank you.
This is the spirit that we all need to be in. We're in it. We're here because we hate what's happening with the pigs killing and murdering Black and brown people. So I appreciate my brother here saying that we are all here together.
Yes, we are.
And whether we agree or disagree on things, we need to struggle with, let's figure out how to put an end to the things that we hate. And what I hate about this system is how the system plunders the environment, how the system treats women as sex toys, as breeders, how the system criminalizes immigrants, cages children. I hate this, what the system does around the planet, where it goes around wars for empire, rapes women and kills children to keep this America on top. I hate what the system does to Black and brown people. Mass incarceration, has a target on their back, has no future for our youth, especially Black and brown. This is a system of capitalism. And I'm with the National Fuck that. How many times have he said things and people have said, he's not gonna do that, but he does it anyway.
Fucking dangerous.
We need to take to the streets as we are in the millions and not stop with the demand. Trump, Pence out now! Trump, Pence out now! Trump, Pence out now! And as the revolutionary, I'm not stopping there. Because I want to get rid of the whole system. Let me leave you with a chance. One is, come and talk with us and find out how you can be part of this. Go to revcom.us and look, Bob Avakian is controversial. Hell yeah, he's controversial. Any revolutionary who's talking about overthrowing the system is going to offend some people. If it doesn't, then you're not talking about an actual revolution. Okay? But look at the substance. This brother has given his whole life to looking at how to put an end to white supremacy and male supremacy. Look at the substance and think for yourself. Okay? So let me leave you with a chant. How do we get out of this mess? Okay, I should have ended first. Okay, just repeat it. How do we get out of this mess? Revolution, nothing less. Let me see your fist up.
How do we get out of this mess?
How do we get out of this mess?
Revolution, nothing less.
How do we get out of this mess? How do we get out of this mess? Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Revolution, nothing less! Black lives matter! Revolution, nothing less! Thank you.
Let's get down to basics. We need a revolution. Anything else in our final analysis is bullshit.
All right, so we're back in the studio, and before we close out episode 20, great victory.
All right.
Great victory.
Episode 20.
We made it to 20. Before we close this episode out, I thought it'd be important, Andy, for us to talk just a little bit about some of the recent developments in the world. Last week, you gave a major commentary in episode 19 about the escalation of fascism, especially the paramilitary forces sent into Portland. We heard a little bit about that from Maya on the ground this week. Also the operation in Chicago. These are big developments, but almost, every single day since then, fascism is definitely on the march. It's been escalating, and so in this last week in particular, Donald Trump tweeted out, it's a very heavy thing, maybe we'll delay the elections. So I think we should talk some about this, but before we do, I want to highlight, and we're going to do two things at once. We're going to talk a little bit about the developments, but also there's a major call for protests from Refuse Fascism. And I think we should front end with this and then drop back to some of why this is so important. Yeah,
I agree. Look, we're facing a danger situation here, and it is happening against the backdrop of the election. These attacks we talked about last week, these paramilitary forces that were in Portland that you did the segment on with Maya and that are being deployed to Chicago and other cities directed against the youth of color in particular. But all this is happening against this election. This regime has said from the very beginning that they see this as their last chance to impose the kind of society that they want, which is a Christian fascist society. And this means a horror for the masses of people here and all around the world. And that the only way to really stop this, we've been saying for a number of years, is for the masses of people to take to the streets in sustained nonviolent protest. Sustained means day after day, night after night, until a demand is met that the Trump-Pence regime must go. We've tried to do this before, but people have been relying on and hoping for that the elections would do this for them. First the blue wave, now the presidential election. But all along, Trump has had no respect for the rule of law because he's a fascist. It is a program that they have involved here. And he's now told you and floated this out, the delaying, if not the suspension of the election. He gave this time the excuse of mail-in voting will be a big fraud, biggest fraud in history and all this. Of course, there's no evidence that mail-in voting is fraudulent. In fact, there's several states that this is how most of the people normally vote. But as it turns out, the Trump-Pence regime is actually undermining this vote to make it a self-fulfilling prophecy. They have put their henchmen in charge of the post office. They've defunded the post office. They suspended overtime in the name of efficiency, which means it's completely inefficient since they've stripped the post office before and of personnel. And they depend on overtime to deliver the mail. So you can imagine the votes don't come in and then a whole process sets off. And this is just one of the reasons that things are sharpening up around the elections. And what it concentrates is what I read from the statement from Bob Avakian at the beginning, a different form of the way that this system, which is oppressive and exploitative all the time, but this is a different form of that rule, which is much more openly terroristic against the masses of people, the rule of law becoming whatever the regime says the law is, and they've put their people in the courts and all this. But we should just spend just 1 second around how do you get rid of this regime? What good is another protest going to do? Well, probably just another protest won't do enough good. This has to be, in preparing for this and then in going forward, something that is sustained. People want to look for a model, they should look and see what was done through the Arab Spring in the countries where it was successful and where not. People should look at Hong Kong, where there's still a ferocious struggle going on. People can look to Seoul, Korea, the capital of South Korea, where people did actually force a change in the government on the basis of protests that continues day after day, must involve hundreds of thousands of people in cities all across the country. The people who rule this country have to feel it's ungovernable. Even the people behind Trump have to feel, some of them, that he's got to go, even as they're hardening, his hardcore base will get harder through all of this, and more determined.
Yeah, I think people have to really confront that if Trump is able to fully impose this fascist form of rule, if he calls off the elections or he just suppresses and terrorizes with his poll watchers, 50,000 poll watchers you talked about last week, that he wants to mobilize to make sure there's no fraud, which is really akin to what went on in Jim Crow in the South, where black people were kept away from the polls. It's not poll watching to keep it safe. It's poll watching to keep people who Trump doesn't want voting to be voting.
Right.
We are really on a threshold here. No one can say exactly when and how the future will unfold, but we can say with a lot of certitude that they have made their program deadly clear. Deadly clear. And now they're calling into question the elections themselves. And people, if we don't want this to go forward and be the future for humanity, we have got to come together and raise this demand. The Trump-Pence regime out now, and refusefascism.org needs to be a movement that grows, that people join with and take up the demand from their own perspective. September 5th is a day for people to take this struggle to a new level. It's not a one-off protest. That's not the desire or the intent, and that would not measure up to the demand of this moment in history.
For our part, for the revolutionaries' part, we'll be there too. And as I read in the introduction to the statement from Bob Avakian, for the revolutionaries, fighting against the Trump-Pence fascist regime and taking part in this movement is not a diversion from or a substitute for fighting for revolution. We're doing it as part of fighting for revolution from our point of view, because this is going to increase the strength of the people. It's going to get rid of a force, this Trump-Pence regime. It's going to put them on the defensive. It's going to remove Trump and Pence from office. All this creates better grounds for fighting for revolution, as well as for every movement of social justice. So this gets concentrated now on September 5th and seeing if we can go forward from there. Other groups have called for protests throughout September in front of the White House and Lafayette Park. This is terrific. We need all different kinds of things. This is not one group wanting to put everything under its control. That's not the dream of Refuse Fascism. The dream of Refuse Fascism is for millions of people to be in the streets with this one single demand: make the country in a political sense ungovernable, such that either they're compelled to resign or they're driven from office through whatever legal means, impeachment, whatever, so that we're not in a situation where tens of thousands of more people die on account of how they've completely mishandled this coronavirus crisis, where when it comes to if they just won't leave office, if they say the election's invalid, if they contest the election and protract that thing in the courts and then in various other ways that they can do, that there is a force in the field that is actually demanding that they go and declares their illegitimacy. So look, we're going to continue to cover this, and it's we're calling for this on September 5th, and
I would tell people to go to the website, refusefascism.org. There's a call up there. Spread it very far. Take it up, organize. Also, we'll be covering it at revcom.us, and we'll continue to return to this here on the Revolution Nothing Less show. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say about this. Otherwise, I mean, it's episode 20. I want you to say something about that, too.
Well, here we are, episode 20. So now we've only got 79 more or 80 more till we get to episode 100. By that time, I hope we have a revolution, but okay.
Let's do that.
And then it'll be a revolution. Here we are. It was good to be here with you in the garage, even as it's probably well over 100 degrees in this place. And as for those who watched our first episode and the second episode saw me sitting here shivering, it was so cold. So we're an extreme show here. Listen, I want to give a shout out to all of you who are watching the show, and especially to our patrons, people who support this show. It's the 20th show. Spread this far and wide and ask people who you know to become Patreons themselves or to donate to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. And I want to thank all of our new and returning viewers, and thank you, Sansar, for being a co-host of this show with me. And that's it. 20 shows. We'll see you next week for number 21.
We'll see you next week.